Israel just struck a port that sits on Russia's most strategically sensitive inland sea. Western media is barely covering it. That should terrify you more than the strike itself. This isn't about immediate damage. The physical destruction at Anzali, while significant, misses the point entirely. What matters is the location. Anzali sits on the Caspian Sea, not the Persian Gulf, not the Mediterranean, the Caspian, and the Caspian Sea is Russia's lake. Let that reality settle for a moment. In a conflict that's already fractured Western alliances, produced the worst American air losses in decades, and triggered nuclear-capable bomber deployments, Israel has now hit infrastructure on the body of water. Russia considers sovereign strategic space. This is a port facility critical to Russian-Iranian military cooperation, commercial logistics, and the entire north-south corridor that's become Moscow's lifeline as Western sanctions bite deeper. You don't accidentally strike there. This wasn't a targeting error or collateral miscalculation. This was a deliberate choice, and understanding what that choice reveals about Israeli strategic thinking and what response options Moscow actually possesses is what we're walking through right now. Start with the geography, because everything else flows from it. The Caspian is the world's largest landlocked body of water, bordered by 5 nations: Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan. But Russia doesn't just border it. Russian naval vessels patrol these waters. Russian military infrastructure surrounds the coastline. The supply corridors connecting Russia to Iran, moving weapons, technology, grain, energy commodities, they all run through ports Moscow treats as extensions of its own security perimeter. Anzali is Iran's primary Caspian port. It handles container terminals, grain storage, military logistics. More importantly, it anchors the north-south corridor linking the Indian Ocean through Iran to the Caspian and onward to northern Europe. As sanctions pushed Russia and Iran out of dollar-denominated Western systems, this corridor became vital. It's not just Iranian infrastructure. It's deeply integrated Russian-Iranian strategic architecture. So, when Israel strikes Anzali, they're not hitting an Iranian asset near Russian interests. They're hitting shared infrastructure in waters Russia considers its own domain. Why would Israel do this? 2 explanations present themselves, and neither is comforting. The first is purely tactical. Israel has failed to decisively defeat Iran despite weeks of intensive operations. Iranian military capacity hasn't collapsed. Hezbollah continues inflicting real costs in Lebanon. The Houthis have closed the Red Sea to Israeli shipping and kept it closed. Iranian strikes have penetrated Iron Dome multiple times. The conflict expanded in directions unfavorable to Israeli objectives. Iran operates because supply chains keep flowing. Weapons, technology, intelligence, all moving through multiple routes including the Caspian corridor. Strike Anzali, disrupt that node, complicate the flow of Russian military technology into Iran. Slow the pipeline feeding Iranian air defense systems, drone components, targeting intelligence. From a pure supply chain perspective, it has a logic, but there's a second interpretation. Darker, harder to dismiss. Israel may be deliberately attempting to drag Russia into direct conflict, not because they believe they can defeat Russia, that's obviously impossible, but because Russian military involvement would trigger NATO's Article 5 mutual defense obligations. The entire Western military apparatus would be forced into full-scale confrontation with Moscow, dwarfing the current Iran situation and reframing everything. In that scenario, Israel's interests and Western interests align in ways that make current Western ambivalence about Israeli conduct politically unsustainable. Everything happening in Iran becomes a footnote to a civilizational confrontation. That calculation, engineering Russian intervention to force NATO's hand, isn't strength. It's desperation from a military that's concluded it cannot achieve objectives through its own power and needs others to fight its existential battles. Now, what can Russia actually do in response? This matters more than anything else for understanding where this goes next. Russia hasn't formally responded with military force, not because they lack capability or because the provocation was insufficient. Russia has graduated response options that impose serious costs without triggering formal escalation. First option, Syrian airspace. Russia controls Syria's air defense environment. They've never closed Syrian airspace to Israeli aircraft despite years of strikes on Syrian territory. If Moscow activates that option now, Israeli long-range strike capabilities against Lebanon, Syria, and Iran through Syrian corridors become immediately constrained. Not eliminated, but significantly complicated and costly. Second option, and this changes everything, advanced air defense delivery to Hezbollah. Currently, Hezbollah operates sophisticated missiles, but limited advanced air defense. If Russia provides S-300 systems, not even their most advanced platforms, just S-300s, northern Israel becomes genuinely contested airspace. Israeli Air Force operations over Lebanon and northern Israel would face threat profiles they've never encountered. The entire northern corridor becomes operationally untenable in ways S-300 coverage makes nearly impossible to address. Third option, enhanced weapons supply to Iran. Russia's already providing targeting intelligence and hardware through various channels. If Anzali crosses a threshold requiring qualitative response, the quality and quantity of Russian military technology flowing to Iran could increase dramatically. Not declared, not formally acknowledged, but operationally consequential within days or weeks. There's critical backstory here explaining why Israel felt they could strike Anzali without immediate Russian military response, and why that calculation may be about to collapse. 2 years ago, Russia offered Iran a formal mutual defense treaty. The structure mirrored Russia's agreement with North Korea. If either party was attacked, the other was obligated to respond militarily, a NATO equivalent for the countries Washington calls the axis of evil. Iran said no. Specifically, the liberal faction within Iranian parliament, influenced by intelligence elements believing Western engagement was still possible, rejected Moscow's offer. They calculated that accepting would permanently close doors to Western rapprochement and leave Iran irreversibly inside Russia's sphere. Israel knows this. Israeli intelligence understands no formal treaty binds Russia to defend Iran. That knowledge enabled the aggressive Israeli campaign. Russia provides support, intelligence, weapons, targeting data, but isn't formally obligated to intervene militarily. The absence of that treaty gave Israel operational room they wouldn't have otherwise had. But Anzali changes the calculation, potentially permanently. Iran rejected the Mutual Defense Treaty to preserve Western engagement options. Now they're watching Israel strike Russian-adjacent infrastructure with apparent impunity, while Russia provides only unofficial support from the sidelines. The argument for refusing the treaty was that it was unnecessary and strategically limiting. After Anzali, that argument becomes impossible to make in Tehran. Here's the prediction worth recording now. After this conflict ends, Iran will seek to revive the mutual defense treaty with Russia that it previously declined. And this time, they'll accept. Let's examine Israel's broader strategic position, because the Caspian escalation makes sense only when understood as part of a systematic dismantling of Israeli military mythology over 18 months. The Iron Dome was supposedly impenetrable. Iranian strikes penetrated it multiple times. The 12-day war preceding this conflict was presented as Israeli demonstration of decisive air superiority over Iran. It had to end at day 12, not 13, not 14, because operational reality on the ground told a different story than the narrative of Israeli dominance. 30 years of carefully constructed invincibility mythology built through genuine capability combined with strategic communications management has been exposed as substantially exaggerated. Gaza remains unresolved. Hezbollah inflicted real casualties and demonstrated the northern border is genuinely vulnerable in ways Israeli doctrine hadn't accounted for. The Houthis closed the Red Sea to Israeli shipping more effectively than any military operation against Yemen has managed to reopen it. And Iran, the adversary Israeli and American officials described as being reduced to zero military capability, continues launching strikes, maintains control of Hormuz, and absorbs Israeli and American operations without collapsing. In that context, Anzali looks less like deliberate strategic masterstroke and more like what it probably is: desperation from a military that's run out of achievable objectives in the immediate theater and is attempting geographic expansion toward outcomes it cannot achieve through direct confrontation with adversaries already engaged. The grass-cutting doctrine, periodic strikes preventing any adversary from becoming too strong, doesn't translate to the Caspian Sea and Russian strategic space. Rules applying in Gaza and the West Bank, where power asymmetry is overwhelming and there's no credible retaliatory threat, don't apply when you're striking infrastructure in Russia's lake. The economic dimension deserves attention because it extends costs in directions insufficiently analyzed. The North-South Corridor, Anzali anchors, connects Central Asian commodity exports. Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan are massive oil and gas exporters to global markets through the Caspian and onward. Disrupting this corridor doesn't just affect Russia and Iran. It affects export capacity of landlocked Central Asian energy producers relying on the corridor's functionality. It affects European markets receiving those exports. It affects global price signals for commodities transiting this routing. And it does so when global energy markets already operate under extreme pressure from the Hormuz situation. If Russia's response includes any action further disrupting Caspian commerce, and Russia has both motivation and capability for such action against third parties, as displacement signaling without directly attacking Israel, knock-on effects for an already stressed global energy system would be significant and difficult to contain. This is the quality of miscalculation characterizing Anzali. Not just immediate military provocation of Russia, but cascading economic disruptions any Russian response produces in a global system already operating at the edge of its tolerance for supply disruptions. Here's the analytical conclusion the evidence supports, stated plainly. Israel struck a Caspian seaport serving as critical node in Russian-Iranian military and commercial logistics. They did so knowing no formal mutual defense treaty obligates Russia to respond militarily. They did so as part of broader escalation patterns taking the conflict from original stated objectives, Iranian nuclear capability, and Hormuz transit, to operations across Lebanon, Yemen, the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, and now the Caspian Sea. The pattern isn't deliberate, strategic expansion toward defined objectives. It's the pattern of an actor unable to achieve stated objectives, expanding geographic scope, searching for a lever producing different outcomes. Russia's response won't be direct military attack on Israel, not because Russia lacks capability or motivation, but because graduated response options available to Moscow, Syrian airspace closure, S-300 delivery to Hezbollah, enhanced Iran supply, Caspian commercial pressure, can impose enormous costs on Israel and its strategic environment without triggering formal escalation direct military action would constitute. Russia plays the long game. The response to Anzali will come in forms harder to attribute, harder to respond to, and harder to undo than missile strikes. But it will come. And when S-300 appears in Lebanon, when Hezbollah fires systems tracking and engaging Israeli Air Force aircraft over northern Israel with precision Hezbollah's previous air defense capability couldn't achieve, we'll all remember this conversation. We'll remember the path to that moment ran through Anzali, through Israel's decision to strike Russia's lake, through calculated arrogance of a military confusing rules applying to adversaries with no powerful patrons, with rules applying to allies of the country holding more nuclear warheads than the rest of the world combined. This is exactly the kind of analysis absent from Western mainstream coverage in English or any European language, not because the analysis is difficult, but because it leads to conclusions uncomfortable for official narratives Western media operates within. We'll keep doing this analysis here every single day. Subscribe to this channel now. Share this video with everyone in your network who deserves understanding the full strategic picture of what's happening. Join us live Monday through Friday. The Anzali strike isn't just another escalation. It's the moment a regional conflict touched the borders of a nuclear superpower's strategic heartland. What comes next won't look like what came before. The rulebook just changed, and most people watching this conflict haven't noticed yet. The consequences are already in motion. Russia's response timeline operates in weeks and months, not hours. When the systems appear, when the capabilities shift, when northern Israel's airspace becomes contested in ways it never has been, the connection back to this port strike will be obvious only in hindsight. By then, the strategic landscape will have fundamentally altered. Israel gambled that striking Russian infrastructure wouldn't trigger consequences they couldn't manage. That gamble's outcome is still unfolding, but the initial read suggests they may have miscalculated badly.